A good Thursday morning to you, Central Georgia. Thanks for tuning in for a look at your extended forecast here on 13 WMAZ+. We have a couple of things to talk about. It was a pretty active overnight with plenty of severe thunderstorm warnings, and if not severe, you definitely saw your fair share of some strong thunderstorms. And this comes on top of 2 days in a row. The past 2 days we've had heat advisories in place over Central Georgia. Will we make it a third today? There is going to be some good news as we settle into this end of the week forecast. So 24-hour rainfall totals. The first thing that you're going to notice about this is kind of a big gaping hole right here in our northernmost counties. And these counties actually were the ones that were upgraded into a level 3 yesterday. But as you can see, they didn't see much come to fruition in the way of rainfall whatsoever. We'll go ahead and break down the specific totals piece by piece. We'll go down to our southernmost counties, where just about each and every one got some form of about an inch of rain. Some of the higher totals did top out even closer to 5 inches. I think the darkest pixel I could find was just around the Byron area in Peach County. 4.7 inches of rain just to the west of I-75. 4 inches down here on the corner of Houston County, getting close to 4 inches along I-75 in Unadilla. 4.5 inches in western Dooley, 3 inches down in Vienna, taking it down to 1.5 inches in Cordele, just shy of 2 inches in Abbeville, 1.5 inches over in Eastman. It's a little patch of blue, still indicating about 1 inch of rainfall over the course of maybe just about an hour or two time frame. Over an inch of rainfall up here in Dublin, 2.5 down in Alamo, and then some portions of Telfair County caught about 3.5 inches. But as we go up to the north, you're not going to find much in the way of rain. You'll still have your patchy areas of some yellows, maybe some oranges. So 3 inches of rain just south of Forsyth, 3 inches just south of Thomaston. And we'll talk a little bit more about Thomaston here in just a minute, specifically north of Thomaston. But many of these areas that were outlined in the level 3, only recording maybe about 1/10 of an inch of rain. So we really just didn't see much in the way of rain necessarily in the form of thunderstorms up in our north and our northeasternmost counties. So it's kind of funny how that does work. You upgrade an area to a level 3, and then they don't have much come to fruition in the way of severe weather. In fact, even downtown Macon did not see much in the way of rain. So a couple of stats that we can recap with last night's storms. I think I counted them right, but about 18 severe thunderstorm warnings. Yes, they did encompass many areas of central Georgia, not all of us. However, we did have one tornado warning, and that was over in Upson County. So it was a period of very, very brief rotation. I think we could only really get a good image of it about 1 or 2 radar scans. So they are going out. There are some reports of damage in northern Upson County, just north of Thomaston, around the Atwater area. When you start to kind of move out towards the west in Upson County, there are reports of some trees down. We've seen some photos in the National Weather Service chat. So the National Weather Service damage survey team, they're going to make a trip down there and kind of assess the damage, and they will give us a report if they are going to confirm a tornado did touch down there according to what damage they do see. But that was the only tornado warning that we did receive, and we really weren't looking at the threat of tornadoes whatsoever. It was kind of a clash of what we call these outflow boundaries. So those really thin gust fronts that do move outwards from thunderstorms kind of clashed with an updraft, so a really quick moving updraft of air, and that did produce some very short-lived rotation at that. But was it enough to produce an EF0 or an EF1 tornado? We'll figure that out over the course of more than likely today, but maybe getting into tomorrow. What we did see very far and wide, hail cores 1 inch and higher in diameter in some local spots. I believe it topped over, or it got over 1 inch in areas like Wilcox County, areas like Crawford County, and I believe Wilkinson County as well. Kind of iffy on my coverage because I was up in the middle of the night and trying to watch what Ben was doing, but also had to make sure that I got my fair share of rest to come in early this morning. 60 to 70 mile per hour radar indicated wind gusts. Now this isn't going to be your wind at surface level. Those radar beams go outward and just slightly upward. So the farther out in distance that you get from our radar, that's going to be a higher reading up in the atmosphere. But we did see some gusts that were reported of 60 to 70 miles per hour in central Georgia and areas just outside of central Georgia, maybe going up I-75 towards Stockbridge and then getting up into the Henry County area near McDonough. At one point, I do remember Ben flashing this box up. Over 6,000 lightning strikes were present at one time over central Georgia. Well, I guess I shouldn't really say at one time, but we did have 6,000 lightning strikes that had happened in the past 10 minutes or so, which is a whole lot of lightning. That was the main story with the overnight showers and storms. It was definitely quite a bit of a light show, and I know I experienced it firsthand driving up to work this morning. It was illuminating that night sky, and we got plenty of videos of people who saw the same thing. Probably a bit of a restless night, and obviously you probably did struggle sleeping just a little bit. But at the same time, at least it wasn't anything that was more damage indicating than just some lightning strikes. And of course, many of you were already in the safety of your home, so that was a good thing. So in terms of the temperatures, number one, why we did see some widespread strong and severe weather is because our temperatures topped out in the upper 90s yesterday. So that's 6 degrees above average, still about 5 degrees shy of the record back in 1914 of 103. At Middle Georgia Regional Airport in South Bibb County, we recorded about 3/4 of an inch of rain, so about 3/4 of an inch, and that puts our year departure back up above 3 inches where we should be this time of year. Remember yesterday I was telling you that we already have a pretty good cushion, but we steadily saw that number getting chipped away at and chipped away at. Well, we got a pretty good amount of rain yesterday at Middle Georgia Regional Airport. It's going to put us back 3 inches above average. 6:28 the sunrise yesterday, 8:46 was the sunset. Now let's get into what's in store for the rest of your work week, getting into your weekend and obviously rounding out the month of June and heading into July. Highs will be down a few degrees. They're not going to be in the upper 90s for the next 7 days. Afternoon and evening rain is going to continue to be possible each and every day. A very typical summertime week is settling in. What we had yesterday in the overnight hours was definitely not reminiscent of a summer day whatsoever. That was an organized complex of some storms and kind of moving in from the opposite direction we typically see some organized weather moving in from. It started up in North Carolina, moved through South Carolina, and then eventually made its way into central Georgia. We normally look at these systems to come in from the west or the northwest, so that was just kind of the setup that we did have. And we did have one of those short waves or those MCSs that we talk about that are really hard to nail down with the timing. They fluctuate a whole lot because yesterday I was telling you that should be out of here by midnight. However, around midnight is really when the bulk of it started to get going on the satellite and radar picture. So the timing can definitely fluctuate very drastically with those. But maybe a little bit of a more fortunate thing that it happened in the overnight hours because many of you were already inside and this wasn't going to pose any implications for any dinner time plans. All right, enough about yesterday. Let's get into what's in store for your future. Right now, across all 4 of our sky cams, we're seeing some glimpses of blue sky, which is a pleasant sight to see after yesterday. I did just say we'll stop talking about yesterday, but just going to use it for comparison purposes. Taking a look at your temperatures. Some areas in the low 80s, most areas still hanging out in the 70s. So we were talking about these numbers this time yesterday, and they were already well up into the 80s. The humidity was out in full force. We only see patchy areas of the dark green present across central Georgia. There's even a fair share of areas that are still hovering in the light green. So definitely a downtick in the humidity levels as opposed to yesterday, and that will help us out on that feels like number. We're still seeing some warm temperatures, don't get me wrong, but it's just not to the threshold we saw yesterday. I think we had triple digits already on the feels like numbers before 11 a.m. yesterday. Well, we're hanging out somewhere in the low to mid, maybe even the upper 80s. Feels like 89 in Gordon and Sandersville. Feels like 87 down in McRae. And the areas over to the west are still feeling like the 70s. So it's feeling much better out there than the blistering heat we had yesterday. Winds and wind gusts, seeing maybe a northerly breeze the farther north you live, shifting going in from the northeast, coming in from the east. The winds are varying in direction all across central Georgia, but still just a steady breeze about 3 to 5, maybe even 6 or 7 miles per hour. So let's talk about that heat index today. First thing you're going to notice is these values don't even get to the triple digits. Not to say that we can't in some spots. However, the main consensus is getting into the mid to maybe the upper 90s. We've definitely seen this graphic fluctuate just a little bit over the course of this weekend. 97 is what this graphic has us topping out at around 4 p.m. So once again, that afternoon window, 3, 4, 5 p.m. is typically going to be the warmest portion of each and every day. However, I think we'll see some values that do get above these numbers forecasted for the heat index. Taking a look at your heat alerts, not much to write home about. Actually, areas of northwest Georgia are under a heat advisory still. But But all of us in central Georgia are clear of any heat alerts today because we have seen that downtick in humidity and we have seen that downtick for your forecasted high temperatures. So satellite and radar picture, mostly clear, continuing to see those clouds decrease in the atmosphere. Maybe a couple of sprinkle showers over in our western counties. We could still see a pop-up sprinkle anytime from now all the way into the afternoon hours, but it does look like the rain is going to be a little bit more widespread going into that afternoon window. We'll talk about it and look at the latest run of Future View here in just a second. But right now it's just a cloudy image all across the Gulf Coast states. Back up here into South Carolina and North Carolina, conditions are actually fairly clear and they definitely had their fair share of active weather just like we did yesterday. So the average high, the average low, not changing from yesterday. Records for today, 102 and 62 for that record high and that record low back in 1952 and 1936 respectively. Obviously our temperatures, well, actually they in some areas did get down to about 68 degrees, so not too far off that record low of 62. 102, we are not even going to flirt with that number today. How about 93 for a high temperature? This is going to be a nice change of pace, and you know it's the summertime when we're very grateful for temperatures that are in the lower 90s as opposed to the upper 90s. Still going to be a hot day, don't get me wrong. Some areas are still going to feel like the triple digits, just not going to be as widespread as the last 2 days and not get too much higher than the triple digits. We won't see values up to 110 like we did see yesterday and maybe even higher than that. Isolated rain chances. That's going to be kind of what you hear us say each and every day for our forecast. The rain chance is very scattered. The rain chance is very isolated. And when we say that, it just means more areas have a chance of staying dry as opposed to receiving rain each and every day. And you'll see that reflected on your 7-day forecast. But I still have the thunderstorm icon right here. Yes, it's not as hot as yesterday, but it is still warm. It is still decently humid. So that's going to be enough of the ingredients that you do need in order to sprout an afternoon shower, an afternoon storm, and it could even be a strong or a severe storm, but going to have very isolated impacts as opposed to widespread impacts like last night. So now we go into Future View. Going into this afternoon, this is 2 p.m., maybe some scattered activity beginning to bubble up in central Georgia, but the consensus is most of the rain chances today are going to be farther to the north of us. So I think today is going to be a day where we have the least amount of rain chances or the least percentage of rain chances out of every day on your 7-day forecast. But now as we go into the overnight hours into early tomorrow morning, yes, we still start out nice and dry. Each morning is going to start out nice and dry like we've been telling you for each of these summer day forecasts. The earlier in the day that you can make plans, the better, because that's when it's going to be dry. That's when temperatures will be a little bit cooler. But when temperatures reach their peaks in the afternoons, this is going to be the story. Scattered showers, maybe a storm or two, some pockets of heavier rain, some pockets of some scattered lightning strikes just after lunchtime each and every day. Friday does look like we see a little bit better coverage of at least some scattered rain in central Georgia. Then we go into the nighttime hours where some of this rain can linger into the picture, but it's not going to be very long-lived because after you get past sunset, temperatures are going to continue to cool down, not going to have as much to work with as opposed to in the middle of the afternoon when those temperatures are warmest. Now we go into a clear start to your Saturday morning, and look at this, right on cue, just past lunchtime. Once again, scattered rain popping up into the picture. It does look like maybe even a little bit more coverage on Saturday as opposed to what we see Friday, but still roughly the same. It's really just going to be isolated. We may see some pockets of heavier rain, some pockets of some showers try to cluster and group together for maybe a little bit more of a widespread impact, but it's still a better likelihood that you will dodge some rain as opposed to receiving rain. But if we keep going according to what Future View does say for Saturday, then this looks like a pretty decent chance of rain, maybe more about 50-50 chance. But we'll keep our fingers crossed that we're trying to keep the rain chances at least below that 50% mark because that's going to mean more areas than not do remain dry. Now let's get into the storm outlooks. I haven't showed these too much this morning, and you've probably heard me the last 2 days have a couple grievances with the SPC because we have this level 1 present for central Georgia all throughout today. Level 1 out of 5 potential threats, really the same threats that we saw with yesterday's strong and severe weather. Gusty winds and possible hail, but once again, if you do see any strong to severe thunderstorms, it's going to be isolated to maybe one end of the county as opposed to very widespread like yesterday. But not only did they put us in a level 1 for today, they put us in a level 1 for your Friday. Now, obviously not trying to discount anything that the SPC does issue, but typically we don't see these issued for very convective and diurnally driven weather, which is going to mean that the rain chances and the storm chances are going to be very scattered in nature, number one. And number two, they're going to operate off the heat of the day. There's no rhyme or reason to it. It's just where you have sufficient humidity, you have some warmer temperatures that contributes to the rising motion of all that surface moisture. And we can see the intensification of some weather fairly quickly in the summertime months. So really just continuing to scratch my head at why we have these level 1s issued. Nonetheless, it's not going to change our forecast. But just to show you why I am confused, because we go to the day 3 storm outlook, the same story for Saturday. Why aren't we in a level 1? We're not in any sort of risk whatsoever. So whether we're in a level 1 or not, that's not going to really mean anything. Scattered showers, the chance of a strong storm or two each and every day will exist for the foreseeable future. Afternoon high temperatures hovering in the low 90s, right around average for the next 5 days, bouncing around between 93s and 92s. But of course, that's not really the story. You probably want to know what it's going to feel like. Well, take a look at this. We'll go to the muggy meter. We may see a little bit of a downtick in humidity from today to tomorrow. I think this is maybe a little bit backwards. I think Thursday should actually be down here in the 60s, and maybe Friday we'll see that rebound back up into the 70s, because we actually see a good mix of light green and dark green currently on the dew point temperatures. So as we go into the afternoon, maybe we see a little bit of an uptick in that humidity, but it's really not going to vary much over the next 7 days. So we are going to have ample humidity that is going to make it feel just a touch warmer, or maybe even a couple degrees warmer each and every day, depending on how much moisture content you have in certain areas of your atmosphere, depending on where you live. And you'll see this reflected on the long-range models. Scattered rain chances all over the south and the southeast, because we're all virtually under the same air mass. We're going to be muggy, we're going to be warm, and that's why we're looking at just kind of sporadic rain chances, no real organization to anything that is moving through. But we could see maybe some boundaries creep closer, maybe get some of those stationary boundaries into the picture. That would create kind of an axis for lift, or maybe a little bit more organization with some rain chances. We'll see how this plays out as we go into next week, but still go ahead and plan on having the rain gear handy in the afternoon and evening hours each day until we get to next Thursday, and then we may be seeing a couple of signs of just maybe some of this rain moving off the coast right here and just moving off into the middle of the ocean and finally not bothering anyone in our neck of the woods. Here's the 7-day forecast. It is so pleasant to not see any upper 90s there, no red boxes with those weather impact alerts. Like I said, today I think is going to be your least chance of rain out of any of the next 7 days, because we'll get maybe a little bit of an influx in that surface moisture tomorrow. That will continue all throughout your weekend, virtually the same forecast Friday, Saturday, and Sunday for any outdoor plans that you have. Then we transition into the last official day of June, which will be on Monday. Chances of rain, I think the coverage might be a little bit higher from Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, but that's definitely written in pencil right now, just trying to pick at straws with the long-range models. Once we get a day in view of the short-range models, we can really get a better idea of the coverage of rain and how many areas it's going to impact. But we bring in the month of July on Tuesday, 91 degrees, going down to 90 degrees on Wednesday. So as those rain chances maybe bump up about 10%, could make an influence of about a degree or two decrease on those high temperatures. This is still 6 to 7 days out. This is far from certain right now, but maybe we can hover below average as we roll into the month of July. And this would not be a bad forecast to continue on for the rest of next week, which I'm sure many of you are already looking at, because that's when we get into 4th of July weekend. And I know just about every single one of you have some plans for that. So we'll keep our fingers crossed that this forecast does continue to quite literally rinse and repeat as we go past Wednesday into next Thursday, Friday, and Saturday and Sunday for the holiday weekend. So now let's take a look at the tropics. We did have some talking points with this earlier this week, but once again, no activity expected in the next 7 days in the Atlantic Basin. Tropical storm Andrea did form 2 days ago, and I believe it might have had a lifetime of about 12 hours. It formed in the northern Atlantic Ocean. Really kind of unsure why they gave it a name, because there wasn't too much organization with it whatsoever. But nonetheless, it did weaken into a remnant low pressure system. And I'm not even sure that there's really still any cloud cover associated with what is left of Andrea in the northern Atlantic Ocean. But we did get an A-named storm, and you do see that update right here in the top right. Just forgot to update it with the day, but yes, this is the 8 a.m. Thursday update, so the Atlantic Basin is still trending quiet. So a look at your Atlantic Basin hurricane names right here. We crossed off Andrea. The next one will be Barry. Then we get to C, D, E, F, G, all the way down the different letters of the alphabet that we do use to classify these tropical systems. So we'll be on the lookout for that. Obviously looking at long range models. Once we start to get into July, that means we're just a little bit closer to getting to a more frequent time of hurricane season. But the Atlantic has been off to a very slow start. And Andrea was just a fish storm, didn't impact any land masses whatsoever, but the Pacific obviously has been a bit of a different story. We've seen at least 5 named storms over there. Haven't checked on it in a couple of days, but I know they did have a major hurricane, which was their E letter. That was Hurricane Eric, that did impact southern areas of Mexico along the Pacific coast. Probably created some inland flooding and kind of the desert terrain over there, some areas with some already loose soil, and that can create some areas of mudslides and landslides and such. But still, not enough talk about the Pacific. We'll just continue to focus on the Atlantic as we go throughout the next couple of months. But thankfully, we're just dealing with organized weather systems that aren't having as big of an impact as a tropical system would just yet. But once we get into August, that's when we're really going to start to keep an eye on the tropics, and we're going to see a lot more areas of potential development over the course of really 3 months probably. Once we get to August all the way into October, and then you get to the end of October, activity starts to get into another bit of a lull towards the end of hurricane season. So let's go back to your 7-day forecast. Anything that you should know for the weekend ahead. I know tonight we have our first 4th of July celebration here in Central Georgia, which will be in downtown Gray. Be sure to tune into the evening show later on tonight. David Guerrero is going to be out there having some fun and showing you what you can experience out there in downtown Gray. Centerville, I believe their fireworks show will be on Friday. A little bit better chance of rain. And then Warner Robins, the big Independence Day concert, is happening on Saturday, I'm pretty sure. I have to go do some looking at all the dates for our 4th of July festivities here in Central Georgia. We do have a great link and a great web story for that online if you are looking for things to do. But one thing you should know, because a lot of these celebrations, of course, going to happen in the late afternoon, the evening hours, the nighttime hours, so you can get a glimpse of those fireworks. Just bring the raincoat, bring the umbrella just in case. But the good news is, hopefully, if you get a shower earlier in the day, maybe it'll use up some of that heat and humidity. You won't have to deal with anything for the remainder of the day. This is a very typical summertime forecast. You're just going to have to make plans to have a contingency plan, really. Make sure that any of those plans can go indoors if the weather is to get a bit messy outside. But all of these rain chances, all these storm chances are not going to be anything widespread like what we saw yesterday. We typically don't see those waves of MCSs really come in the month of June. However, this has been a stretch of about 2 months where these MCSs have been coming in. Well, now I can say left and right because they quite literally been coming from the left just about the entire time, and then this one came in from the right. But your average high temperatures, still not going to be as bad as yesterday, but the one thing I do want to hammer home about this is it still will be hot, just not going to be heat advisory criteria, not going to quite be as unbearable. Still make sure that you're hydrating very frequently when you are spending some time outdoors. Make sure that you're going and taking breaks in the shade. If you are out on the job site, maybe doing some landscape work, doing some roofing work, whatever you may be doing, some HVAC work. And then, of course, try to stay inside as much as you can. Try to take those breaks indoors, rather, I should say, and make sure that you are applying and reapplying sunscreen. Just a couple helpful tips that we'll continue to make sure that we're reiterating so you can take care of yourself, take care of your body, and continue to enjoy the sun and enjoy some summertime fun. But right now, the temperatures aren't going to dip below 90 degrees much more in our 7-day forecast. Maybe we could see another couple of upper 80s days, but as long as we keep them out of the upper 90s and we keep that humidity to some reasonable levels, I'm sure no one will have any complaints about feeling like the upper 90s near the triple digits. That's pretty typical of summer here in Central Georgia, and we know we can get a whole lot harder. We did issue that weather impact alert for the heat advisory on Tuesday, and then yesterday, of course, it was for the combination of the heat advisory and with the nighttime storms. So going into the future, those weather impact alerts, we just really issue them when we want you to pay extra special close attention to the forecast. we're not going to issue any of those weather impact alerts unless it's an excessive heat watch or an excessive heat warning. And David Guerrero did a great breakout on that yesterday, explaining what those are. That's just upping the threshold just a little bit, because if we did it for heat advisories, we'd have a whole lot of days on our 7-day forecast that would have red boxes on them. So we don't want to kind of dilute the message. We want to really issue it for those days that, hey, this is something that you really need to do. But we issued it for that heat advisory on Tuesday because it was the very first one of 2025. Weather's all relative. This heat is all relative. So you're not really used to feeling that unbearable heat like we have had the last 2 days. So now maybe you got your warm up. You're pretty used to it as we have more heat advisories issued throughout the summer months. Just use it as kind of that first sign of caution to take care of your body and make sure that you're keeping your body cool. But then excessive heat watches and excessive heat warnings, that's what the weather impact alerts will go out for in the future. So there was a good bit to talk about, and now we're getting into a little bit more of a boring stretch of weather. But tomorrow is going to be Friday, and of course I love to preview any weekend festivities that we have. Lots of 4th of July celebrations. I'll be going around maybe listing some of those in a graphic, and then I'll be doing some event-specific forecasts for each and every one of them. So I'll be putting some fun graphics together, so there will be no shortage of some red, white, and blue graphics as we are rolling into the end of June, into that first week of July. But that's where your forecast does stand. I did mention good news, and this is the good news because the heat is not as unbearable and the rain chances are a lot more scattered, so you can get some afternoon plans in and you won't have to combat the blistering hot heat. However, make sure you're still taking care of yourself. It is summer in Central Georgia after all. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you back here at 10:30 tomorrow for another look at your extended forecast and your weekend preview forecast.